Hey everybody, this is Mark, and welcome back to Beyond Profit, a global perspective. I have a question for you global entrepreneurs out there. Let's say that you have discovered a business that you think is prime for global expansion. You want to put it someplace else. And then you hit the hard question, and that is, where do I go? Now, that's not just a problem for entrepreneurs, it's often a problem for students as well. As a professor, I have a project which is a global business plan, and students sometimes have a hard time figuring out where to go. It seems like people always have one of two problems. It's always, where in this entire world do I go, or I know where I want to go. Both of those have its own unique issues, right? If it's where in the world do I go, then it's like, I really don't know what to do. But if you already think you've got it figured out, then you might be limiting your options. You may be just looking at one when maybe you should be looking at many. You should be looking at a broader picture. What we're going to talk about today, and that is regional analysis, allows us to bridge the gap between those two perspectives. Now, a lot of people find regional analysis something really difficult to wrap their mind around. First of all, it's easy for people to think in terms of countries and not in terms of regions. So there's sort of like this natural block about how do I even approach that question. And the second is data. That is, how do I find regional data that might help me make a good decision? Have any of you been faced with that issue? If that's so, leave comments down below, ask me questions. I'd be happy to talk to you about that. So in this video, we're going to explore a couple of things. First, we're going to talk about how an understanding of competition can help you figure out what region and perhaps ultimately what country you want to go into. And second, how to find and get data that will help you engage in regional analysis so that you can explore additional options. So let's get into it. Before we get into this video, I want to thank you all for tuning in. I know some of you are my students, and so you're going to feel like you have to watch this anyway. So hey, I thank you because you're actually watching the video and getting something out of it and learning, so that's wonderful. If you're an entrepreneur or someone else who has interest in this too, I'm really happy that you checked this out, and I hope that it can be very helpful for you. If that's the case, share it with other people who you think it might be useful, who might find it useful. Subscribe, like it, that tunes up the YouTube algorithms. Right now, I've got fewer than 500 subscribers, but I would like to be able to help a whole lot more people than that. Another thing, and this is a question for my students and anybody else who's interested as well, is there something you want to learn about? Something that maybe I'm missing in some of the videos that I'm creating? You have a certain issue, challenge, problem, whatever. I'm happy to make more of those. So start making some suggestions maybe in the comments below, and I'd be happy to help you out. All right, we're going to start off talking about your global competition. Now, figuring out who your competitors are is probably one of the easiest things that you have to do. But it really is the first step, is you've got to find out where your competitors are, because that might affect what kinds of regions you want to look at. So where are they doing business? Is there a regional pattern to this? What countries are popping up? Which region is best to exploit, right? Is there a place where there is a lot of competition, which suggests that you have everything you need in order to succeed there? Or is there very little competition, which means that maybe it might be a little harder to get a foothold, but you've got fewer people competing with you and there may be greater opportunities, maybe even a first mover advantage. So ultimately what you want to do, I think, is use this approach to determine a couple of regions to compare before you start getting into a specific country or countries. Let's say that you want to take a Whataburger to another country. Now, Whataburger is a company that at the moment of this video doesn't really have a global presence. So let's start off, we Google who are Whataburger's competitors. And for the sake of argument, I'm going to rely on Google AI. I know it's not perfect all the time, right? But as an illustration, it makes it easier for you. I would suggest you don't just start there, but you actually go a little deeper and confirm what Google AI says. But at any rate, says Whataburger's main competitors in the fast food burger space include like In-N-Out Burger, Jack in the Box, and Sonic Drive-In, alongside national giants such as McDonald's, Burger King, Wendy's, and Chick-fil-A. What I would do then is figure out, okay, which ones of these have a global presence. So In-N-Out Burger does not have a global presence, but if that ends up being an idea for somebody's project at some point or another in the future, then there are some additional complications. It looks like they're deliberately not going to other countries due to a strict quality control model requiring all stores to be near their distribution centers for maximum freshness. So if that ends up being anybody's plan, anybody's idea, then you have to start thinking about, like, where are the distribution centers? Do they already exist? Are you using the same kinds of distribution centers as some of your competitors? Or do you have to set up something on your own supply chain in order to get the stuff that you need? And that makes it a little bit more of a complicated thing. As I've said in other videos, the choice to do like a fast food place or a retail business is difficult because there's lots of moving pieces. And this just illustrates exactly how complicated that might be. Let's go on to another choice, right? Jack in the Box. Well, does Jack in the Box have a global presence? But it does have locations in Guam and Mexico. Okay, so there is something international happening there. So, that gives you a very specific pinpoint that, like, if Jack in the Box is one of your competitors, apparently they're making that work in Mexico, right? So let's go to another one on the list, Wendy's. This says that Wendy's operates over 7,000 restaurants globally in more than 30 countries. And it breaks it down for you. Isn't that nice, right? Asia, India, Indonesia, Japan, Philippines, and so on, right? Latin America and Caribbean, Brazil, Colombia, Costa Rica, Peru, Middle East and Africa. So it's got lists of countries by region. So what I would do is put together a spreadsheet where you've got a business and you have a region and then all of the countries within these different regions, so you can see sort of what the clusters are. And then find another one and find out all of the places that they're operating. And then start to see where are the regions where there's a lot of presence. Now that's how you start your analysis. Now, by the time you get a little bit further in and you specify a country, then you're going to be looking at competitors from more of a marketing standpoint. That is, like, how can you outflank? How can you beat your competitors? And once you know what that country is, or even where that specific area, that city or that location is, then you can really pinpoint on things, because it may not just be global competitors that you're facing, it may be local competitors. And sometimes those are the strongest ones that you have to face anyway. Another important question, are these competitors really competitors? And this is true at the local level, but this is also true at a global level. So think about it, Whataburger. So we've listed some of the competitors. We know it's Wendy's, it's McDonald's, any place that's a fast food place that's selling a burger. What about KFC? What about Chick-fil-A? Okay, are those probably are in the same sort of competitive space? So if I don't feel like a burger and I want some kind of chicken, okay, I'm gonna go down that road. But what about Chipotle? Okay, higher price bracket. To me, I don't think that's exactly the same. That's not quite the same competitive space. So make sure that when you are casting your net and looking at competitors, you really are looking at what a consumer would choose in as much of a similar situation as possible. Similar products, similar price range, similar sets of options. Will I have to bend out of that range in order to get some other product? Well, it's probably not a competitor at that point. Some other things you may find helpful are the same factors that we talked about in a previous video when we talked about cost, benefit, and risk. So some things to think about when you're comparing regions. How big is the market for your product? What can economic data tell us about their purchasing power? Prospects for future market development? Are there specific regional risks, conflicts, recessions? Is the legal system strong in some of these countries? Is there a history of partners violating terms or contracts? You can also apply Porter's diamond in order to look at a region and try to figure out what's going on. Again, you're looking at sort of clusters of countries where these businesses have have put themselves. So think about factor conditions. What are their natural resources and other endowments that might help you be successful? Think about availability and cost of labor, capital, land, natural resources, infrastructure. If you need high-tech people, do they have them? What is the cost? If you have a high-tech enterprise, you need certain things. You need electricity. You need connectivity. You should also think about firm strategy, structure, and rivalry. What kind of industries already exist there? How do they make it work? If your industry doesn't have a presence, is there a reason? Then there are demand conditions. Do people want to know what you're selling? How do you know there's a demand? Or a labor demand for the kind of work you're offering if you're doing manufacturing there, for example. You don't want to move a business there and then all of a sudden you don't have the right kinds of workers in order to try to man the things that you need to do. Then there's related supporting industries. What kind of stuff do you need to make your business work? Is there already a group of businesses that, not competitors, but businesses that actually provide the things that you need? Are there government policies that support or prevent your entry? So let's talk about getting data for regional analysis. Sometimes you can get regional level data, and I will show you how to get some of it, but sometimes you just have to look at specific countries that are in a certain region in order to establish certain patterns. So here are some options to look at in terms of trying to find regional data. So I'm going to start off looking at the IMF data portal. So here it is. IMF, of course, stands for International Monetary Fund. So on this IMF site, I'm going to look up Sub-Saharan Africa blog. Cut that out. We're just going to look at Sub-Saharan Africa, steady growth amid fiscal challenges. So I'm going to click on that. Increasing government revenue and better managing debt can help foster resilience and accelerate growth. So this is nice. It's giving some nice regional data. You're looking at real GDP growth, non-resource intensive countries. That's cool. Sub-Saharan Africa, oil exporters, other resource intensive countries. So depending on what category of business you're in, this might tell you a little bit about what their GDP growth has been and whether or not there's good opportunities, like is the economy looking good at the moment. Here's another thing we can do. We can go back to the home page and scroll down, and here's an IMF data mapper. A lot of cool things we could look at. World Economic Outlook, but let's look at something regional, right? So Africa Regional Outlook. There's a good thing to click on. From there, we can look at Africa Regional Outlook. From there, we can look at real per capita GDP growth. So here we are. Look at that. It's got a nice map, and it's color coded to tell you how much growth it's had. So the darker orange, it looks like more than 4%, whereas the green is going to be somewhere in the 0 to 1% range. You can also identify individual countries and what their growth rates are as well. Okay, there's one more thing we're going to look at. I'm going to type in Regional Economic Outlook and search, and then this is great because if you have a look, there are regional economic outlooks for a number of regions. We've got Europe, Asia and Pacific, Middle East and Central Asia. We can click on any one. Let's take Asia and Pacific. And here you've got a lot of information. You've got videos, you've got a full report and a blog and a press conference. You've got tables that break things down based on country. So quite a bit of data that would help you understand what's going on in that region in terms of if the economic conditions are favorable for your entry. So now let's look at another database. You'll find that this database is helpful. I would say more helpful if you're dealing in products and exports than you are if you're dealing with services like restaurants. But I do think it's interesting to check out, so see what you can do. You start by trying to find the harmonized tariff schedule code, or HTS code, that aligns with whatever product it is that you are exporting or selling or whatever. So I'm using an example here, and I'm choosing whiskey. It's fun, right? So I type whiskey into my search engine to find out what the HTS is. It's going to give me a number, heading 2208.30. So that is the code that I'm going to use in order to extract data. The next database I'm going to look at is the ITC trade map. So let's click on that. We're going to enter in the HTS code, which doesn't have the point or the dot in it. And we're going to look at some of the data. You find all sorts of interesting information about what's happening in the world of whiskey. So this chart illustrates who's got the biggest share of imports in whiskey. So it looks like the United States and China are two of the largest whiskey importers in the world. Now keep in mind, we're not nearly as interested in the United States because we're not, it's our market, right? We're interested in exports. So if we're looking for a good place to export whiskey, guess what? Looks like China buys a whole lot of whiskey. Now keep in mind, these numbers are 2024. So that may have changed since there have been tariffs and trade wars, and maybe China is buying a whole lot less whiskey in 2025 than it did in 2024. Who knows? But that's the idea. Even if, several years from now, you're looking at this video, you're trying to figure this out, whatever data you're looking at is going to be current. I'm just showing you how to read the data. Let's look back at this table, the growth of countries' imports. So we want to know places that have grown in terms of their import of whiskey. Well, let's look at the big circles, right? There's China here. There's Germany. Looks like Japan, the Netherlands. Any of these circles that look pretty big are probably places where there's a decent whiskey market because the imports have increased there. Now I'm going to look at another database. It's the International Trade Administration Research Center. I'm going to click on that. And this is something, by the way, that also works for products and services. So I'm going to type in whiskey market entry and see what it has to say. It's giving me results on which countries where there might be market opportunities for me to try to export my whiskey there. Click on Bulgaria. Might be an interesting one. It's going to talk about their agricultural and food imports. I'm going to do a Control F and see if I can find whiskey. U.S. agricultural exports to Bulgaria are up 26% compared to the same period in 2022. Top export products have been food preparations, whiskeys, tree nuts, and protein concentrates. So we know the United States already is exporting quite a bit of whiskey to Bulgaria, so we know that there's a market there. Anyway, you can look among any of these possible places. There's Latvia. Again, it looks like it says bourbon and other U.S. whiskeys are increasingly popular in Latvia, although the market is still dominated by U.K. imports. Right? Scotch is going to be a big deal if you're interested in whiskey. But again, there are opportunities here if you want to go to Latvia. So it seems to me, again, this is also indicating a cluster, right? If I'm going to the next step and I'm comparing different countries within a region, I'm thinking that maybe Latvia and maybe Bulgaria, that suggests Eastern Europe to me. Maybe I can find a third Eastern European country, and then I can do a systematic analysis between those three countries to try to figure out which one might really be the best one for my entry. And that's just one region. So if I go back here, look, here's Chile. Liquors, whiskey, spirits, so on, are subject to a 31.5% tax. Okay, that's not great. Let's look at Colombia. It says the primary source of whiskey is the United Kingdom, although U.S. or consumer interest in U.S. whiskeys and bourbons is growing. So again, you've got a possible good export market in Colombia. And then you could choose three of those countries and compare them. And you've got two regions. You've got Eastern Europe and you've got, say, South America or something. And then you can sort of narrow that down and select your specific country based on additional analysis. Let's do a different one. We were talking before about Whataburger, so just for fun, let's look at restaurant market expansion. So I'm going to do a search for that here on the website. Type that in, see what we get. All right, there's all sorts of cool things. Look, here's like Philippines, franchise market. Hong Kong and Macau. Nepal. It looks like there's, Nepal, Kazakhstan, Sri Lanka. We're looking at Central Asia, Armenia, the Philippines. We're talking about Southeast Asia down there. So, I mean, you can look at these clusters of countries, try to figure out a region, and then figure out, hey, it looks like they're growing in terms of those options. So again, it's a great way to use this International Trade Administration site in order to get data that will help you figure out what regions you should be focusing on. All right, there's one final thing that I want to talk about before we get off this idea of regional analysis, and that is free trade agreements. So a free trade agreement is an agreement between two or more countries where the countries agree on certain obligations that affect trade in goods, services, and protections for investors and intellectual property rights, among other topics. And the United States has free trade agreements with different countries. And that might also give you some additional ideas of where you ought to go regionally or even in terms of specific countries. So I'm going to go look at the list of free trade agreements. This comes from the Office of the United States Trade Representative, and it has a whole list. The United States has comprehensive free trade agreements in force with 20 countries. So if we go to, I know Colombia was one of the countries we were looking at before. We click on that. It has a free trade agreement. And that may mean that that market's more accessible perhaps than some others. I'm just showing this to you. It's something worth looking at and a place where you can look at additional data that will help you make a decision. For my students, the goal is to look at two regions, do a comparison like this, and then narrow down to which region between the two is really the best option. The next steps are going to be to look at 3 countries within those regions and then try to narrow down which country ultimately you want to go into. Now, again, that's a student project, but the same process applies if I were acting as a consultant and somebody was asking me my advice, like where should you go in the world? Well, let's look at regions based on the data. Let's look at 2 regions. Which of these 2 regions is better? Well, based on this data, it's 1. And then we're going to look at 3 countries, and then we're going to narrow it down to 1. Because it's easy to sort of say, oh yeah, I know somebody in this country, and it seems like an obvious place to go, but you're narrowing your options vastly if you're not casting your net just a little bit wider than that. Anyway, I hope you got a lot out of this video. Hope all of your expansions go well, and until next time, good luck.